Our next speaker is someone who was brave enough to submit a paper, manuscript, chapter to the student modeling competition. And this work gets reviewed by a small committee of all the students who submit this. This is around December. Look out for a call if you're interested and you're doing like a lot of modeling work. But the highlights of those competitions, they get like a little slot in our meeting to like present their neat work. So today we'll hear from Marie-Christin Wimmler. She's at the Technical University in Dresden. And she will talk about advancing ecological model with PyManga.
That's right. So welcome also from my side. Thanks for the introduction. And as you already heard, I'm coming from a background of ecological modeling, so I don't really work with Earth system models. But I think I work on a piece of the puzzle that is becoming increasingly relevant. It is the dynamics of forest ecosystems. So forests influence carbon fluxes, energy balances, the hydrological cycle, yet in many models, their internal representations are often quite simple. And to better understand forest dynamics, it would help to make these representations more process-based and modular. And this is where PyManga comes in, a platform or a Python-based platform that is designed to support flexible and modular forest modeling. And in this talk, I want to briefly introduce the platform, share some use cases, and then focus on the challenges we have. Okay, so now it's working. To understand how PyManga approaches forest modeling, it helps to first look at the nature of forests themselves. So forests are complex adaptive systems made up of individual trees that interact with each other, but also with their environment. And these interactions are usually non-linear, species-specific, and also spatially explicit. And trees compete, for example, for light, water, nutrients. They grow, die, regenerate. And all of these processes are influenced by the climate, by disturbances, but also by site conditions. So to capture these dynamics, individual-based modeling seems to be a natural choice. I don't know if you are familiar with individual-based models, but as the name says, in this kind of models, individuals are described separately. They have their own characteristics and behavior. They can also interact with each other and their environment. And this then leads on to emergent patterns at the system level. And there are many such individual-based models that simulate forest dynamics using trees as individuals. And they differ, for example, in their level of detail and complexity, but also on how they abstract the individual plant. And one such model, individual-based forest model, was developed by my colleague some years ago. It simulated the growth of an individual mangrove tree. And then, of course, another colleague came, picked it up, and adapted it to new questions. But of course, at the same time, the original developer continued using and further developing his own version in parallel. And this happened several times already within our working group. So over time, the ideas, assumptions, and code bases starting to diverge, even though everyone was working on the same basic concept, modeling trees and their competition for resources. So this experience motivated us to create PyManga, a shared modular plug-and-play platform where core concepts can be reused, compared, and extended without re-implementing them. Yeah, sorry, this was too late. Okay, so to make this work, we have set out some design principles. So first, modularity. So models are built from interchangeable components. Second, transparency and traceability. So all changes made to the platform should be visible and well documented. Then collaboration, researchers should be able to work on different parts of the platform without conflict. And last but not least, automation. So testing, documentation, deployment are streamlined. And therefore, we use GitHub and many of its features, such as pull requests and continuous integration. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the first design principle, modularity. So in PyManga, everything is centered around the individual plant and its resource availability. And this is a simple picture of this original model developed in our group that simulated the growth of mangrove trees, but in response to the availability of resources below ground and above ground, which are quite often light and water. And in PyManga, these processes like plant growth, mortality, and resource availability all described in separate modules. And modules of one compartment can then be exchanged with alternative implementations, or several processes can be simulated in parallel. So following this idea of modularity, we have implemented several modules that represent alternative implementations of the same process. So for example, the competition between plants or trees can be described using well-established concepts in this community. And they are, for example, called zone of influence and field of neighborhood. Doesn't matter what it means now. And yeah, the same is true also for other processes such as the plant growth or seedling dispersal. And the modules of the same compartment are then organized into libraries. So for example, we have a library called Plant Model Library that contains different modules that describe plant growth and mortality. But we also have libraries for more organizational aspects. So for example, the Model Output Library offers different options to define the output format and structure of the simulation. And here I'd like to emphasize again that PyManga is not a model. It's rather a platform where user-specific models can be configured by combining specific modules and concepts. So here's an example of such a model configuration that was done by some of my colleagues that wanted to simulate the feedback between tidal dynamics, pore water salinity, and forest dynamics in an Australian mangrove forest. And they used the previously mentioned plant growth model, then basic concepts for motility and the competition for light. And because they were mainly interested on what happens below ground, they used an external numerical groundwater model that is named OpenGeoSys. And this model is quite resource intensive. So for someone that's then not so interested in what happens below ground, it can just be replaced by other modules that represent, for example, the tidal dynamics in a much simpler way. So what or which modules to choose from is highly dependent on the research question, and of course should be carefully considered to build reliable and robust models. And one way to test whether a model is robust or not is to deconstruct it and thereby reducing its complexity. And with PyManga, this can be easily done because we can just activate or enable certain processes and modules. So to illustrate this, I can give you a very simple example. Here, either one or two processes are activated to describe the mortality of the trees and the below ground interaction. So in the simplest case, the below ground interaction is only described by a resource limitation, and trees only die when they don't get enough resources. And in the most complex or in the more complex case, resources are limited, and then there's an additional process inducing competition between the plants based on the size and position of the neighboring trees. And there's also a second process describing the mortality. And as you can see then on the right side, the different combination of these modules lead to a different structural composition of the forest, which can be described by typical forest metrics, such as the tree density, so how many trees we have in a hectare, or the stem diameter distribution. And of course, the effects of some modules are stronger than others. And also the combination of modules can have superimposed effects. this could make really difficult to interpret the results and sometimes even lead to misleading conclusions. So therefore, testing the robustness of the model, so testing each module and the interaction is really essential to build reliable models. Now about the challenges. As you can imagine, we have quite a lot of modules and a lot of flexibility, but this of course brings some challenges in maintaining the functionality of the platform. And that is why we are using module benchmarks and automatic testing in PyManga. And to really properly test the platform, we need to create those benchmarks for all of our modules and also for the relevant combinations of modules, which can be quite a lot at the end. So why are we doing this? With this benchmarks, we can set standards for what we expect to be the outcome of a specific module. And then we have some quantitative figures that we can use to assess whether PyManga is doing the same thing after we apply any changes to the platform. But we can also use these benchmarks to compare the modules within PyManga, but also with implementations outside. So for example, if someone first develops a module in a different programming language. And then we can evaluate the interactions between the modules. So these benchmarks need to be really easy to reproduce, as I said, even outside of PyManga, and also fast to run, but still, of course, cover the functionality of the tested module. So that is why we defined a simple standard setup to construct our module benchmarks. And this includes the number of trees, their position and size at the beginning of the simulation, but also temporal and spatial resolution and the output format. So with this concept, we created a lot of benchmarks so far, and then these benchmarks are run automatically each time a change is proposed to the platform, indicating whether everything still works as we expect it to work. So what have we learned so far from developing this platform? Developing new code and modules is always a lot of fun and everybody is motivated, but the maintenance, is not so fun. And that is why we came up with some rules or workflows that we need to follow. So first, we have design rules for our modules that includes definitions of our interfaces and the structure of each module, but also code and documentation style. Then we have a kind of checklist of requirements for introducing a new module. So each module should come with a human-friendly documentation following a specific template, and also, of course, with all the benchmarks and required input files. And last but not least, there's a review process. So there's a technical and textual review of new code. And this is also the most challenging part of our list because it requires a lot of energy, not only from the developer, but also from somebody else. And as there is no direct benefit of doing this, it always requires a mutual favor for doing this. But so far, we are quite lucky. This favor has been returned by many of my colleagues that are now using PyManga for their research. And I want to express a special thank you to my former colleague, Jasper Bartmann, with whom I had the idea. And we crafted the first version of PyManga together. So thank you for your audience. You are welcome to explore the platform, also contribute a module, or just get in contact. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Christin, and thank you for sharing those lessons. I think that's like something that many people who develop like larger modeling like frameworks like struggle with, and it's great to see that you like worked out a workflow for it. Are there any questions for Marie-Christin?
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. Two quick questions. The first one is when you actually have all these different modules integrated together, how is the computational time compared to fully integrated models?
Can you repeat how is what?
Yeah, so in terms of the computational time, so when you actually put all these different modules together, how that is compared to when you have the full model tightly coupled?
Okay, I never tried to couple all of them because it doesn't make sense from an ecological perspective, and the computational time really depends on the scale you model. We are usually more looking into smaller scales to understand processes and not like landscapes. And then, yeah, it depends also on the processes that are activated. For example, if you consider all the neighbor of a tree, it takes more time to calculate some indexes, for example, if you don't, compared to not considering all the neighbors.
Thank you.